Today we're going to be talking about cultural diversity in rehabilitation, obviously a very important topic. We're going to be talking about cultural issues in the delivery of services to consumers. We're going to be talking about techniques to enhance cultural competence. And we're going to be talking about embracing cultural differences as a way of functioning, as a way of performing our professional role. First of all, what is culture? Culture is a way of being, relating, behaving, acting, which can differ according to the context, the history, the tradition, and within which human beings live out their lives. Practices, identity, and values play a major role in setting the direction of the individual. Now, in certain respects, I define culture even more broadly without minimizing individual culture. Culture can be the culture of an agency, how we function as an agency. Culture can be the way an employer functions. And culture can be not a way that individuals function within their own community. It can be within their own environment, within members of their own religion or ethnic group or racial group. So culture can be almost any type of circumstance. And when we look at, let's say, culture of employment, that's not to diminish or minimize the culture that someone has based on the values of their ethnic background. It's just a different way of looking at culture, but it's also something that in order to understand the individual and to understand the interface between the individual and society, that it's important that we understand those factors. What is cultural awareness? Cultural awareness involves a recognition of diversity and the tapestry of human experience. It entails respect and encourages differences, which sometimes can be very threatening for us. Fears. People have fear of the unknown, fear of people who are different from them. But it also acknowledges that people's values may be different from our own. What we want to do is build our capacity to function with a wide range of individuals and to feel comfortable with a wide range of individuals who may have value systems and may have perspectives which differ from our own. And what we want to do is to focus, to look at those individual differences. So again, as in many other areas, we look at one level, at the macro level, the broader society, the broader culture of individuals from different backgrounds or environments or circumstances or geographic locations or different groups or different ethnicities or religious groups. And we also focus on the individual. It's important, as in other aspects of rehabilitation counseling, that we know our own values, that we understand where we come from, and it's also important that we understand, just as in other aspects of counseling, that we don't impose our own values or our own way of doing things or our own solutions that we've had onto other people. That we, as we talked about in counseling, that we focus on looking at the individual from the individual's perspective. But having said that, I also believe that it's important for us to see how we can help the individual be able to adapt and to function in the other environments in which the person aspires, such as educational environments, employment environments, social environments, and also how those environments can modify and can focus and restructure to assist the individual. A woman by the name of Judy Heumann from the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services said that disability only becomes a tragedy for me when society fails to provide the things we need to live our lives job opportunities, or barrier-free environments, it is not a tragedy for me that I am living in a wheelchair. The medical versus the social model of disability and rehabilitation, again, which is important from a cultural perspective. The medical model is based on assessment of physical and mental functioning. The social model is based on capacity and function. The medical model certainly has a place. We build on medical issues in rehabilitation, but we practice more in the social model of helping people adapt and adjust into the world based upon where the person is at and what that person needs to do to transition from where they're at to other areas of functioning, again, employment, education, social functioning, independent living. Cultural diversity in rehabilitation means acceptance of persons as individuals, respect for the abilities of individuals, expect differences, upset predictions, beware of stereotypes, and act as reflective decision makers. And it's sometimes very difficult for us, even though we think it isn't difficult. It's sometimes very difficult for us to be able to work with individuals and to understand the experience of others and to accept the experience of others. And also to, again, this goes back to counseling, to develop that trust where the person is able to talk with us about his or her experiences and how those affect and impact the individual, and how those experiences relate to and influence the person with regard to participation and be able to move forward. And again, that's all part of what we do in the counseling process. And nobody has a market on or the corner on cultural diversity. In many respects, we're all diverse. We're all different. And in one instance, you, based upon your background, may be in the majority situation, but in another circumstance, you might be in the minority circumstance. And it's important for us to look at ourselves, take a step back, look at ourselves, and that's part of being a reflective decision maker. It's for example, it's at one point we might be the consumer, another point we might be the counselor, and so it's important for us to think about all the different perspectives and all the different ways that people function in the world. Disability, as I've already said, is part of the social fabric. Disability is a natural and normal part of functioning. That was something that we talked about in a more recent legislation, where we talked about disability not being, somehow different and off the map, but disability being part of a normal part of functioning. And as people age, they might not have impairments that rise to a level of being disabling, but people develop different conditions, whether it's hearing loss, or whether it's visual impairments, or whether it's physical functioning. So people develop disabilities over time. And so cultural diversity looks at the disability, looks at the individual, looks at the perception and the perspective of the individual having a disability, and disability is going to be viewed differently in different cultural environments, and it's up to us to understand those differences. Defining personal expectations, having people take responsibility, as Judy Newman was talking about, how to be accepting and tolerant in a world that's not always very understanding or very tolerant. We have to work with disability in terms of the portrayal of people with disability as having negative images. Many times people with disabilities feel, or people feel more comfortable saying, well, that person's disabled, at least I don't have that. Or sometimes people are threatened by individuals with disabilities, thinking that, what if that were me? Well, what if I had to use a wheelchair? One of the great things that the ADA has done has helped people with disabilities become more involved in everyday societal things. So there's a greater expectation that people with disabilities can enter buildings without difficulty, can participate in training or education and jobs. And again, moving away from the notion of people with disabilities as being, quote, special, and also moving away from the notion of having greater expectations for people with disabilities in measuring success or measuring outcomes. Again, this is all, creates bias when we look at people with disabilities and cultural issues and the interface between disability and culture. And again, this can be culture and disability interface within the individual's community, within the values within the community, whether it's social community, religious community, ethnic community, or the interface in culture and disability in the educational environment or in the workplace environment. It can be almost any environment. And a more welcoming environment, a more accessible physical environment, a more accessible communication environment, the more welcoming and it's going to be for the person with a disability, and the more expectation that the person with a disability will participate in that activity, again, be it school, be it education, be it independent living, or be it something along the lines of employment. Moving away from the notion of someone having a disability is damaged goods, less than whole, being courageous, the notion of being handicapped, cap in hand, because we've moved away from that, cap in hand, and handicap meaning begging, dependent or childlike, and again moving away from those stereotypes. It also entails our own self-awareness, our knowledge of ourselves, our own attitudes, our own values, and not just what we intellectually know about how we should view a situation, but also our own emotions. How do we really feel? And sometimes we surprise ourselves with our own, sense of how we stereotype people. How do we, look at examining, being reflective of how we treat other people? Do we treat other individuals the same? Do we treat people who we know have a higher level of education differently than individuals who have maybe don't have the same level of education we do? Or do we treat people or have different expectations for people who come from different backgrounds than we do? And sometimes these things are subtle that unless we really step back and examine them, we're not aware of these factors. So we have to look at our level of functioning and expectations. Are we culturally competent? Do we possess an egalitarian perspective? Do we understand cultural issues from a broad perspective, as I've tried to describe? Do we understand how the impact of a culture has on individuals not part of that culture, and how the adjustment and adaptation to being in that culture, in a different culture, is important, and how we can facilitate that integration. You can say that one kind of example of this would be if we were to go to a religious ceremony of a person from a different background than we are. We go there and we respect that and we participate, but we know that we're not going to be there beyond, let's say going to somebody's wedding, beyond that event. And then we can go back to our own environment and still respect the person and still be involved with the person. At a different level, you have, when you have merges of, let's say, two organizations, that's not like going to a religious ceremony and then leaving it and going back to your own. frequently the merging of let's say, two departments in a business, which might function differently, and merging how people do things is also part of the cultural adaptation. And it may not be at a personal level, more of a professional level in doing that, but that's more ongoing, and even that can provide difficulties. We have, as kind of saying this a little differently, cultural expectations in employment, social functioning, our roles in society, expectations of people with disabilities, and how we view people with disabilities vis-a-vis welcoming people of all kinds into the environment, and appreciating people with differences, whether those are physical or mental differences, or social or environmental differences, or religious or ethnic differences, and respecting people of all kinds, and seeing how we can adapt and adjust to what we do, and then helping others to do the same. Why do we have cultural diversity? Obviously, we live in a global economy. Global economy, people are more mobile, people are more involved. We go not just to different parts of the country, but we have people coming in. Many companies have facilities and branches in many countries. There are a variety and diversity of jobs to be performed. People live longer who have disabilities. People develop disabilities with age, as I said before. And cultural diversity is a reflection of society. We live in a tapestry and no longer a melting pot. That we now take more pride in looking at and respecting individual differences than trying to melt everybody into becoming one and the same. So what can you do? What can we do? We can recognize our place in our environments, our different environments that we function in, whether those are work environments, social environments, religious environments. We can try and work to feel comfortable with differences. We can encourage differences. We can avoid trying to always find the common denominator and actually focus on ways in which we are different and enjoy those differences. And we can recognize our differences and not just recognize our similarities.